Call of Duty as a franchise is mainly known for one thing: multiplayer. A generation of kids have now grown up in online multiplayer lobbies getting called various horrible obscenities as kill streaks rain down from above and grenades go off left and right. But aside from the multiplayer, there's always extra components that go with it. Depending on the game, you'll either be killing zombies or trying to complete skill-based objectives to earn bragging rights on the internet leaderboards. But probably the most often overlooked feature of a CoD game is by far the story-driven campaigns. Despite usually being the focus of the marketing upon initial reveal, the campaigns in CoD games are hardly ever touched by the millions of players that log on every year, and the trophy/achievement stats back that up. While some of the campaigns certainly aren't worth playing through more than once, or not at all, others have created fan-favorite characters that help define the FPS genre in the modern age. While early CoD games have pretty simplistic levels really only based around historical moments in World War II, that changed with the release of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Developer Infinity Ward moved away from historical fiction with their earlier titles and into the realm of contemporary fiction. Instead of fighting on the front lines of Europe in an easy story of good versus evil, the lines became slightly blurred as players adopted the roles of hardened special ops personnel. Inspired by films such as Black Hawk Down, Modern Warfare's single-player campaign was more than just a shoot-them-up tutorial for multiplayer. While its story isn't too complex, there's plenty of subtleties and subtext to provide more than enough of a groundwork for a trilogy. And that's just what the game did. 2 more entries in the series followed in 2009 and 2011, and by 2019, the series had enough staying power to be fully rebooted. And now we're on the eve of a second game in this new rebooted timeline, with the all-new Modern Warfare 2 set for release very soon. Many are excited to get back to the more grounded setting that Infinity Ward excels at and away from the bombastic nature of Black Ops and Vanguard, and I'm certainly one of those people. I mean, what the heck even is this? While most are probably excited for the new multiplayer suite, my most anticipated part of the new game is by far the campaign. While I'm excited for the new maps and the reset and Warzone to move away from this, I can't wait to see what Infinity Ward has in store for the story this time around, as I felt they handled the reboot in 2019 almost perfectly. So before it comes out, I thought I'd go back in time and trace Infinity Ward's progress in just the single-player story department. No multiplayer maps or Spec Ops missions are going to factor into the discussion here. We're just going to be taking a look at their campaigns. So, since it's the lead up to the new Modern Warfare, where else do we begin but with the original? Released in 2007, Modern Warfare 1, or Call of Duty 4, takes place in 2011. Players assume the role of Soap McTavish, an operator with the UK's elite team of SAS soldiers. While breezing through the tutorial, we're allowed to get to know some of the supporting characters. First is Gaz, an overall jovial soldier who always has a sarcastic comment ready to go for when the situation calls for it. He's the main source of comedic relief in the game, as the story keeps itself deadly serious throughout most of its runtime. While he's not overly comedic, Gaz helps lighten the mood just enough so that way things don't ever seem too dire.
I like to keep this for close encounters.
Gaz, can't you make it open faster?
Negative, sir. But you can try pulling it if it makes you feel better.
Knife the watermelon. Nice! Your fruit killing skills are remarkable.
And of course, the tutorial also introduces us to one of the most iconic faces in Call of Duty history, Captain Price. During the entire first game, Price is the stern but loyal commanding officer that always has a plan and is always ready for a fight. While a character like that could easily become one note, the writing and actor Billy Murray's line delivery help give Price a clearly identifiable heart underneath his gruff exterior. His bleeding heart and the kindness he shows his comrades in the little moments is what helps Price stand out from the pack of other very similar Call of Duty characters.
Alright, let's top these before they kill the old man.
Nikolai's in hell right now. We're gonna walk him out. We take care of our friends.
He works well enough as a character that other characters from the other Call of Duty games seem like pale imitations of him. And so with our SAS characters introduced, we set off on our first real mission. The tone of the game is immediately set for the at-the-time modern era. These aren't valiant liberators fighting across Europe in Nazi oppression, these are elite soldiers on a Black Ops mission where almost anything goes. Captain Price sums it up perfectly in just 2 words.
Rules of engagement, sir. Crew expendable.
After easily taking down the security team on the freighter, Bravo team works to exfil with their objective but run into a problem when the ship is fired on by enemy jets, eager to keep their secrets out of Western hands. The SAS commandos manage to all make it back in one piece as the ship sinks and we swap viewpoints. In an extended opening credit sequence, players are forced into the backseat of a car at gunpoint as the soon-to-be ex-president of an unnamed Middle Eastern country. Given the direction the reboot went in, and for better sentence structure, I'm just going to call the country Urzikstan. This deliberate slowdown in the pacing allows the player to really take stock of the stakes at play. We've already been teased with the idea of a nuclear weapon in play, and now we see who might be willing to use it. With Khaled al-Assad assuming control of Urzikstan, the SAS head into Russia, further diving into the gray area of this modern conflict. The country is in the middle of a civil war, and the murky nature of modern warfare is summed up nicely between Price and Gaz.
Loyalists, eh? Are those the good Russians or the bad Russians?
Well, they won't shoot us on sight, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, well, that's good enough for me, sir.
After rescuing an informant known as Nikolai, he tells us that an American invasion of Urzikstan is a mistake, and that the West is playing into al-Assad's hands. We then switch to the US Marines as Sergeant Paul Jackson, and the level design makes a slight change accordingly. The previous missions with the SAS were more about keeping to the shadows and smaller room-to-room engagements. Instead of fighting whole armies head-on, they kept to their covert nature and watched from the shadows, assisting where they could but keeping to their objectives. With the Marines, however, the fighting becomes much more open as you are now part of an entire invading force. The Marines clear rooms searching for al-Assad, but when they don't find him, they have to fight block by block across the city they're invading. This is where the bombastic combat CoD is known for comes into play, as RPGs are fired left and right, and monster closets spit out dozens of enemies at a time from all directions. I dare you not to get disoriented from all the incoming fire at the TV station. Eventually, Marines become pinned down in a bog and take a breather to defend a tank repair crew after fighting non-stop for hours. But if you thought the SAS characters were taking a breather during all this, you're wrong. Switching back to them, you realize that they've been fighting for their lives and dodging enemy patrols after their helicopter was shot down. While the action picks up a little bit more compared to the previous SAS missions, there's still plenty of sneaking through the shadows and an overall larger sense of being on their own than with the Marines. They could at least call in air support and request immediate aid from other forces in the area. Bravo team, however, is forced to make do with what they have while they wait for help to get to them. And that help arrives in the form of an AC-130 gunship. Death from Above is easily one of the most iconic missions in any Call of Duty game, detaching players from the reality of boots-on-the-ground combat and making them an invincible force of nature that rains down fire from the sky. The small people running around on the ground stand no chance against you, and the crew takes a morbid delight in watching bodies go flying from the impact of a nearby shell.
Shot! Kaboom. You gotta get him.
And given the switch up in perspectives from the regular first person to the above the clouds viewpoint, the environment also becomes more destructible. Buildings will crumble and topple thanks to your bombardments. While certain things like small pieces of cover and objects can be knocked around during regular combat, your small arms fire can't really do much against the levels themselves, and any destruction is always scripted. But here you can level pretty much anything you want as long as it doesn't have a blinking strobe or isn't a church. After the British forces are rescued, the game switches back to the Marines for the final offensive of Urzikstan. This is another place I want to touch on the level design. Unlike many of the later CoD games that have campaigns filled with a myriad of objectives in each level, CoD 4 has several levels that often are just simple point A to point B objectives, and many of them are played with the Marines. While point A to B is what all missions boil down to, most have a little side of flavor to them that gives the players something else to do so they feel like they're keeping busy, or it's an escape on a timer to keep tensions high. But the mission objective here is simply for the Marines to fight to the end of the street. That's it. While some might find that boring, it's probably one of my favorite missions in the game because of how much freedom it gives you. Your objective is to fight to the end of the street. That means you can do so in any way you please. The entire street is made up of buildings with fully designed interiors in them. While you can choose to stay outside and simply pick people off from behind cover, clearing these buildings offers a more thorough approach, so you know when a building has been cleared. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to, and in a modern era where so many games funnel you through linear pathways without much of a chance to explore as you see fit, it's refreshing to go back to 2007 and watch as Infinity Ward lets you choose a tactical situation. If a level like this were designed nowadays, I doubt the devs would have designed the interiors of every building on the street. A couple, sure, but you have total freedom here to clear it as you please. I think that's awesome. And if this area looks familiar, it's also practically one-for-one a map in the multiplayer as well, similar to Bog. So they really got the bang for their buck with how well these locations were designed. The next mission, however, brings up a slight negative, as I don't have complete and total praise to heap on this game. This mission heavily features one of the more outdated aspects of the early CoD campaigns, something I mentioned a couple of moments ago, and that's the monster closet. For those unaware, a monster closet is a spawn point that endlessly spits out enemies until the player moves past it. You can sit in the same spot for hours and not progress thanks to these, and it makes this level and a few others stupidly frustrating on veteran difficulty. But that's how a lot of these games were designed back then, so what are you gonna do? While it's annoying, it's just one of the many ways the game shows its age, but that aspect of this mission is usually overlooked thanks to the way it ends.
All U.S. forces be advised. We have a confirmed nuclear threat in the city. Nest teams are on site and attempting to disarm. I repeat, we have a confirmed Everyone, hang on!
Despite having been seeded early in the game, the idea that al-Assad has access to nuclear weapons is largely forgotten by this point in the campaign as you focus on clearing rooms and cracking skulls. It's fitting that the final mission featuring the Marines is set at dusk, as 30,000 men are lost in the blink of an eye. I'm sure that won't have any serious ramifications later on down the line. But if I have to make another critique, it's that the Marine characters aren't as memorable as the British ones. Lieutenant Vasquez is by no means a Captain Price, and while Sergeant Griggs attempts to fill the Gaz role a time or two, he doesn't have quite nearly as much of an impact until later on, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Overall, these are characters that felt as if they were destined to die, and so didn't have as much character work put into them because of it, since they die halfway into the game. While Price and the SAS aren't terribly more developed than they are, there's just enough extra put into them to make them to stand out more compared to the Marines. But if the Marines had been focused on more, maybe their deaths halfway through would have seemed like a waste. Pacing and character dynamics can be a tricky balancing act to figure out, so Infinity Ward probably did as much as they could have with them given the runtime that they had. So with the American offensive in Urzikstan presumably halted thanks to the loss of their main ground units, the task of bringing al-Assad to justice is now squarely on the shoulders of Captain Price and the SAS. And like before, we get another open level that allows the player to choose which targets to take down as they search for al-Assad's safe house. It might always end at the same place, but the freedom to choose how you get there is welcome. Once you do capture him, however, it quickly becomes clear to Price that he was never the mastermind. The real villain here is Imran Zakayev, the leader of the Russian ultranationalist party that is trying to return their country to their old Soviet communist ways. As Price gives the backstory on him, we get to experience two of the most legendary missions in all of Call of Duty history, all gillied up and one shot, one kill. I won't spend too much time on these as they've been discussed plenty by the community over the years, but there's a reason they're so highly regarded. The atmosphere of this game really shines as Captain Macmillan leads Price through the decaying remains of Pripyat. Most of the color in the game becomes a little bit more desaturated to help establish both the flashback sequence and the tense situation. From hiding from the column of troops moving in, to the dash across the truck convoy, the hairs on my arms always stand up when replaying this level. And of course, then we get one shot, one kill. For all the building tension the previous mission introduced, finally taking the shot in Zakayev and fleeing the area as you're being chased lets that tension out and replaces it with sheer adrenaline as you hold off and wait on rescue. Another difficult section on Veteran, a good rule of thumb is to always avoid the dogs in the pool and use them to your advantage against the first wave of enemies to save your ammo and claymores. After Price and the lads are picked up by Sergeant Griggs, they set their sights on their next target to end the war, Viktor Zakayev, the son of Imran and Mr. Sneery McSneerface that drove us to our deaths earlier in the game. Unfortunately, that sneer doesn't last long as he kills himself rather than be taken captive to rat out his father. In retaliation, Zakayev takes over a nuclear weapons facility and launches 2 missiles at the United States. The following missions are a desperate race against the clock to disarm the missiles before they make landfall and get Zakayev. While they're certainly the most linear missions in the game, the tension is still high enough to where you want to get through it as fast as possible, and it keeps you in the moment as much as possible. I think it's also here that I want to speak on the 2016 Remastered just for a moment, as the quality of life improvements that Raven Software made to this game are outstanding. Simple little things like extra animations here and there on top of the obvious graphical improvements really make this an outstanding game to play even today. That's especially a nice touch here when entering the deactivation codes. Instead of a simple progress bar sliding across the screen, Soap actually types in the commands, helping to keep you fully immersed in the moment. So with the world saved and enemies bearing down on them, what do our heroes do? Joke about beer.
It's just too hot, man. But room temperature? Please, a beer should be ice cold.
A lager, maybe, or a glass of water like you drink, and a pint of stout.
I'm gonna have to school y'all both when we get back stateside.
Yeah, well, either way, we're stopping in London first. And I'm buying.
Well, at least the world didn't end. Hit it.
It's moments like these in the door opening joke earlier that really helps give these characters a personality and makes them feel likable and real, even if they aren't the deepest characters ever written. Griggs especially works best alongside the SAS guys as opposed to his former comrades, as he is able to bounce off of Price and Gaz's established dynamic and not feel out of place. Despite it being a little contrived that Griggs' team of Marines would have been elsewhere when the nuke was going off and then they're able to link up with the SAS, it's not something I spend too much time thinking about because I enjoy their team dynamic so well. So now we've reached game over and you all probably know what that means. Our team of heroes is down, Gaz and Griggs are killed, and you're the only one left to finish the mission. The moment Zakayev goes down was one of the most satisfying in gaming history. Despite being an underwhelming villain overall and having only one line in the entire game, the history the story builds around him, all the blood and effort that goes into taking him down, makes for an excellent payoff anyway. And to further put a heartbreaking spin on things, you realize that the last 5 days are never going to be widely known about outside of Special Forces circles. Excluding the flashbacks, each mission begins with a day, meaning that the entirety of the game takes place over less than a week. This is a great but bittersweet note to end on as a final point about the art of 21st century warfare, and really just war in general.
The Russian government released a statement today confirming a series of nuclear missile tests in central Russia. Although world leaders were quick to denounce the action, Russian officials maintain that the missile tests fell well within established UN protocols. No comment was received from the ultra-nationalist party, where rumors of a possible leadership struggle have just begun to surface. In other news, the search for a ship lost in the Bering Strait due to a major storm has been called off.
So as the credits roll, you can take a great big sigh of relief that the world is saved. Right before you down a gallon of gamer juice to play Mile High Club on veteran difficulty, one of the most stupidly frustrating missions of all time. But bonus mission aside, the story really ends with Soap being rescued by Sergeant Kamarov and the Russian loyalists, and with it a genre-defining game that helped shape the modern FPS landscape. After its release, almost every major FPS franchise copied the way CoD 4 handled basically every aspect of this game. From the evolution to the multiplayer and to the way it designed its story levels, if an FPS game has a story mode component, it treats CoD 4 as the benchmark, and for good reason. My only gripe now is that the gameplay feels slightly outdated, but it's a game from 2007, that's kind of to be expected. While simple compared to more modern entries in the genre, this in no way makes this a bad game now. Modern Warfare holds up extremely well and proved that Infinity Ward had the chops it took to deliver on their promise of a blockbuster experience. And if players in 2007 thought that Modern Warfare was big, well, they hadn't seen anything yet.